Eleanor Richardson was the richest woman in our town. She lived off the $50 million fortune left by her husband Walter's oil company. But money meant nothing to her. Since she lost her son David in 1994, Eleanor had just been breathing, not living. When the doorbell rang that morning, the housekeeper Maria answered as usual, but the man at the door, my God, he looked so much like David that Maria's knees started shaking. The same blue eyes, the same jaw structure. Even the small scar on the left corner of his lip was identical. The man introduced himself as David Richardson. David Richardson, who had been missing for 30 years, who everyone knew was dead. He said he wanted to see Eleanor. Maria called me in panic. I was Eleanor's niece and handled all her affairs. When I rushed to the house, Eleanor had already started talking to the man. They were sitting in the living room. Eleanor's hands were trembling, but there was such happiness on her face. She was smiling for the first time in 30 years. Before we continue with this incredible story, hit that subscribe button for more unbelievable true stories that will leave you speechless. The man knew everything. David's treehouse where he fell when he was 7. His dog Rusty's death. The Italian lullaby Eleanor sang to him every night before bed. He even shared secrets that only David and his mother knew. Things nobody else could possibly know. I immediately tried to intervene. This had to be a scam. It had to be. I had buried David's body. I had read the police reports. He couldn't have survived that car accident. But Eleanor wasn't listening to me. Her eyes were only on that man. The man calmly turned to me and mentioned a detail even I didn't know. He said there was a hidden compartment behind the closet in David's room that nobody knew about, and David's diary was hidden there. I ran upstairs. I pushed the closet, and there it was, really there, pages filled with David's handwriting in a dusty notebook. Eleanor started crying. My son, is it really you? She whispered. The man held Eleanor's hands and said, Mom, I finally came home. At that moment, Eleanor's heart could have stopped from happiness, but it didn't. Instead, it was as if 30 years of mourning had suddenly ended. Family members started arriving one by one. After hearing the news, my brother Thomas was furious. This is insane. David is dead. We all saw his funeral, he shouted. Our cousins were in shock. Some wanted to believe. Some absolutely refused. The man, without any panic, told everyone personal memories about David. He told Thomas about the fishing trip they took together in 1992, how Thomas fell in the water, and David saved him. Thomas's face went white because only he and David knew this story. But I was still suspicious. I said we needed to do a DNA test. The man didn't object at all. Of course, he said calmly. I'll do whatever it takes for my mother's peace of mind. That night, Eleanor wanted to sleep in David's old room for the first time in 30 years. The man stayed in the next room. In the middle of the night, I heard sounds from Eleanor's room. When I cracked open the door, I saw Eleanor hugging that man and crying. I missed you so much, son. Every day, every hour, I thought of you, she was saying. The next morning, we went to the hospital for the DNA test. Dr. Klein was Eleanor's family friend of 40 years. He personally conducted the test. He said the results would come in 48 hours. During those 48 hours, the house was literally divided in two. One side believed this man was David. The other side insisted he was definitely a fraud. The man was very calm during this time. He spent hours with Eleanor. They looked through old photo albums. He told stories from David's childhood. I heard Eleanor's laughter that I hadn't heard in years. The woman had practically been reborn. But things were about to get even more complicated. The second night, while everyone was asleep, I decided to do my own investigation. I snuck into the man's room and went through his belongings. What I found made my blood run cold. He had documents, lots of them. Medical records, psychiatric evaluations, and photographs of David from angles I'd never seen before. But the most disturbing thing was a letter written in David's handwriting, dated just 1 week before his supposed death. The letter read, "If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Trust no one, especially not Uncle Richard." Uncle Richard was Eleanor's brother-in-law, who had died 5 years ago from a heart attack, or at least that's what we were told. The next morning, I confronted the man privately. He looked at me with those eerily familiar blue eyes and said something that made my skin crawl. "Sarah, I know you were only 12 when it happened, but you saw something that night, didn't you?" At the hospital, my heart stopped. I had never told anyone what I saw at the hospital the night David died. I was there with my parents, and I had snuck away to find a vending machine. I saw Uncle Richard in the corridor, talking to someone in scrubs. They were exchanging something minlow, and then Richard said, "Make sure the body is unrecognizable." I was young and scared. I never said anything. I convinced myself I had misunderstood. But now, this man, this supposed David, knew about it. "How do you know about that?" I whispered. He pulled out another document. It was a medical report from a hospital in Mexico, dated 2 years after David's death. The patient's name was blacked out, but the injuries described matched exactly what David would have sustained in the accident. The patient had survived, but with severe amnesia and facial reconstruction surgery. "I didn't remember anything for years," he said. "They told me my name was Michael. I lived in Mexico, worked as a translator, but then 3 years ago, I started having dreams, memories, a woman singing an Italian lullaby, a big house with white columns, a mother who loved me more than life itself." Eleanor had been listening from the doorway. I hadn't heard her wheelchair approaching. The look on her face wasn't surprise. It was recognition. "I knew it," she said. "A mother knows. I felt it in my bones that you weren't really gone." Thomas burst in then, waving his phone. "The DNA results came early," he announced. "Dr. Klein called me directly." He paused, his face pale. "It's a match. This is David." The room exploded. Some family members were crying. Others were shouting that it was impossible. But I noticed something. The man, David, didn't look relieved. He looked sad. "There's more," he said quietly. Everyone fell silent. "I came back for Mom, yes, but also for justice. Uncle Richard didn't work alone. The accident was staged. They wanted the inheritance, but they didn't count on me surviving." Eleanor's face hardened. Richard always resented Walter for being more successful. "But I never thought." She turned to Thomas. "Your father knew something, didn't he? That's why he and Richard stopped talking right before David's accident." Thomas nodded slowly. "Dad found discrepancies in the company books. Richard had been embezzling. He told me years later. But by then Richard was dead, and Dad thought it was better to let it go." But David shook his head. "Richard wasn't working alone. Someone in this room helped him. Someone who's been managing your finances for 30 years, Eleanor. Someone who made sure you never looked too closely at where your money was going." All eyes turned to Marcus, Eleanor's financial advisor and Thomas's best friend. He had been standing in the corner, silent until now. His face was sweating. "That's ridiculous," Marcus stammered. "I've been loyal to this family for decades." David pulled out a final document. "Then explain why you've been sending monthly payments to a private account in the Cayman Islands. The same account Richard used. The same account that's been paying for the medical care of a patient in Mexico for 30 years. Marcus tried to run, but Thomas grabbed him. The police were called. As they led Marcus away, he finally confessed. Richard had promised him a cut of the inheritance if they got rid of David. But when David survived, Marcus had to keep paying the Mexican hospital to keep him there, sedated and confused, while telling them he had no family. But the body, I said. We buried someone. David's expression darkened. A homeless man. Richard found someone, with no family, no one to miss him. The fire made identification impossible, except for the items, my wallet, my watch, my ring, all planted. Eleanor was crying now, but they weren't tears of sadness. My boy survived, you survived, and you found your way home. But the story wasn't over. That night, as we were all trying to process everything, Eleanor called me to her room. David was there too. Sarah, Eleanor said, there's something else. I've known Marcus was stealing for years. I let him because I had nothing to live for anyway. But I hired a private investigator 5 years ago. I knew David might be alive. I was stunned. You knew. She nodded. Not for certain, but a mother's heart. I never gave up hope. The investigator found traces, someone matching David's description in Mexico. Medical records that didn't add up. Payments Marcus couldn't explain. I've been waiting, hoping that somehow my son would find his way back. David knelt beside his mother's wheelchair, tears streaming down his face. All these years you never gave up on me? Never, Eleanor said firmly. Not for a single day. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The media got hold of the story. Dead son returns. The 30 years murder plot. Exposed headlines screamed. Marcus was charged with attempted murder, fraud, and embezzlement. He eventually confessed to everything, including how Richard had planned it all. But the most shocking revelation came during Marcus's trial. He revealed that there were others involved, prominent members of the community who had invested in Richard's scheme, expecting to get a piece of Eleanor's fortune once David was gone, and Eleanor died of grief. The list included the town mayor, the chief of police who had handled David's accident case, and even Dr. Klein. That's why the DNA results had come back early. Klein had been trying to warn Marcus that the truth was about to come out. One by one, they all fell. The corruption ran so deep that state investigators had to take over. Our quiet town was turned upside down. But through it all, Eleanor seemed stronger than ever. Having David back had given her a reason to fight. But not everyone believed the story. Some people whispered that this was all an elaborate con, that the real David was still dead, and this man had somehow fooled everyone, including the DNA test. They pointed out inconsistencies. How could someone survive such injuries? How could amnesia last exactly until Eleanor's health started declining and she began talking about changing her will? I had my own doubts that I kept private. Late one night, I found David standing in front of the family portrait, taken just months before his accident. You really don't remember anything from those years in Mexico? I asked. He turned to me, and for just a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Not confusion, but calculation. Then it was gone. Fragments, he said. Like a dream, you can't quite recall. David, I said carefully. If you're not really David, if this is all some elaborate scheme, I need to know. Eleanor's heart can't take another loss. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Sarah, what makes someone who they are? Is it their DNA? Their memories? Or is it the love they carry for someone, even through decades of darkness? I may not remember every moment of being David Richardson, but I know with every fiber of my being that Eleanor is my mother. I know I would die for her. Isn't that enough? I never asked again, because I saw how Eleanor bloomed with him there. She started eating again, laughing again, living again. She even started walking short distances, something doctors said was impossible at her age. David was by her side every moment, reading to her, talking about plans for the future, making up for lost time. The fortune didn't matter to him. He signed documents, refusing any inheritance, saying he only wanted his mother. This silenced many critics who insisted he was after money, but it raised other questions. If not money, then what? Why return now? The answer came 6 months later. Eleanor's health had improved so dramatically that doctors were calling it miraculous. She was out of the wheelchair, walking in the garden with David, when she suddenly stopped. "I need to tell you something," she said to him. "Your father's death wasn't natural," she continued. "Richard poisoned him, slowly, over months. I found out after you disappeared, but I had no proof. The police were in Richard's pocket. I've been waiting all these years for justice." David's face went pale. "Mom, I know why you really came back." Eleanor interrupted. "You remembered, didn't you? Not just me, but what they did to Walter, what they did to us." David nodded slowly. The memories came in pieces. Dad sick, Uncle Richard always there with his special tea, you crying at night, then my accident. It all connected. Eleanor smiled sadly. "You came back to expose them all, not just for you, but for Walter." "And for you," David said. "They destroyed our family. They needed to pay." As I watched them together, I realized the truth didn't matter anymore. Whether he was David returned from the dead, or someone else who had become David through shared pain and purpose, he had given Eleanor something precious: justice and peace. The trials continued for 2 years. Marcus got 25 to life. The others received various sentences. The town slowly healed from the scandal, and through it all, Eleanor and David were inseparable. Eleanor lived another 3 years after David's return. They were the happiest years I'd ever seen her have. She died peacefully in her sleep, with David holding her hand. Her last words were, "I knew you'd come home." At her funeral, hundreds came to pay respects. David stood by the grave, and I heard him whisper, "I kept my promise, Mom. They all paid for what they did. Rest now." After Eleanor's death, David disappeared. He left a note saying he needed to find himself, to discover who he was without the mission that had driven him home. The inheritance went to charity, as Eleanor had specified in her new will. Some say they've seen him in different parts of the world, helping other families find justice, exposing corruption, fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. Others say he returned to Mexico, to the life he had built there during his lost years. But I know the truth. Every year, on Eleanor's birthday, a single white rose appears on her grave. No card, no message. Just the rose, the same kind David used to pick for her from the garden when he was a child. I saw him once, 3 years after Eleanor's death. I was visiting her grave, and he was there, in the distance, watching. He looked different, older, more at peace. Our eyes met across the cemetery. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of our shared secret, then walked away. I never saw him again. But I know he's out there somewhere. The boy who died and came back, or the stranger who became a son. It doesn't matter which. What matters is that he gave an old woman her heart back, exposed a web of evil, and showed us all that sometimes justice takes decades, but it does come. Some people still debate whether he was really David Richardson. They analyze photos, compare mannerisms, argue about the DNA test, but they miss the point entirely. He was David in every way that mattered, in his love for Eleanor, in his quest for justice, in his sacrifice of any inheritance for the simple right to call her mom. The Richardson mansion stands empty now, sold to a family from out of state who don't know its history. But sometimes, when I drive by at night, I swear I can see a light in David's old room, and shadows of a mother and son reunited. if only for a brief, precious time. That's the thing about truth. Sometimes it's not about facts or DNA or proof. Sometimes it's about love so strong it can bring someone back from the dead or create them anew. Eleanor died knowing her son had come home. David, whoever he really was, gave her that gift. And in the end, isn't that the only truth that matters? Marcus died in prison last year. On his deathbed, he made one final confession. He swore that the man who came back really was David, that he had survived, that the Mexico story was true. But then he laughed and said, "Or maybe I just want to believe that, because the alternative, that someone loved Eleanor enough to become her dead son, is even more frightening." We'll never know for sure. The medical records from Mexico mysteriously disappeared. The DNA samples were contaminated in a lab fire. All we have are questions and a story that seems impossible but changed everything. But I choose to believe that love can conquer death, that justice can prevail even after decades, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the lost really do find their way home. Eleanor Richardson is buried next to her husband Walter now, and beside them is an empty plot with a headstone that reads David Richardson, lost and found. Whether he'll ever occupy that plot, or whether it will remain empty forever, a monument to a mystery that defined our town, only time will tell. But every year, on the anniversary of his return, I leave 2 roses on Eleanor's grave, one from me, and one for the son who loved her enough to come back from the dead, in whatever form that took. What you're about to hear will leave you speechless. This is the story of Harold Mitchell, an 82-year-old man who fooled everyone around him, and how his revenge became the most shocking revelation Golden Years Nursing Home had ever witnessed. I was there. I saw everything unfold. My name is Maria Rodriguez, and I was the night janitor at that nursing home for 15 years. Harold's story changed my life forever, but more importantly, it exposed the true nature of everyone around him. You won't believe what happened when the truth finally came out. Harold Mitchell looked like any other forgotten elderly resident when he first arrived at Golden Years. Worn clothes, trembling hands, no visitors. He took the cheapest room available, the one with the broken heater and the view of the dumpster. The staff treated him like he was invisible, or worse, like he was a burden. Head nurse Jennifer would roll her eyes whenever Harold needed something. The facility director, Patricia Barnes, would openly complain about welfare cases, like Harold draining their resources. But there was something different about Harold's eyes. Those pale blue eyes held secrets that none of us could have imagined. Every night when I cleaned his room, he would be sitting by the window, holding an old photograph of a young woman and a little girl. His wife and daughter, he told me once, died in a car accident 40 years ago. Since then, he'd been alone. The other residents had families who visited occasionally, brought flowers, pretended to care for an hour before leaving. Harold had no one. Well, technically he had a granddaughter, Emily, but she never came. Harold would talk about her sometimes, how she was a successful real estate agent, how proud he was of her achievements. But Emily never called, never visited, never even sent a card on his birthday. Before we continue with this incredible story, hit that subscribe button for more unbelievable true stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about human nature. Patricia Barnes made Harold's life particularly miserable. She would delay his medications, claiming the pharmacy was slow. She would serve him cold food, saying the kitchen was understaffed. When Harold's arthritis got worse and he needed help walking, Patricia denied his request for a better walker. State insurance doesn't cover upgrades, she said, with that fake sympathetic smile. But I saw her approve a brand new walker for Mrs. Henderson the same day, whose son was a local politician. One night, I was cleaning Harold's room when I found an envelope under his bed. It had fallen from his nightstand. The Chase Bank logo caught my eye, but I didn't open it. Harold was awake, watching me. "You're a good person, Maria," he said in that soft voice of his. "The only good person I've met here." He took the envelope and placed it back in his drawer. But I noticed something. There were more envelopes in there, all from different banks. Harold never complained about the treatment. When Jennifer forgot his heart medication 3 days in a row, Harold just smiled. When Patricia moved him to an even worse room in the basement, basically a converted storage room, Harold thanked her politely. The room was damp, cold, and had no emergency button. Perfect for someone who won't be around much longer anyway. Jennifer had laughed to another nurse, thinking Harold couldn't hear. But Harold heard everything, and he remembered everything. I started bringing Harold food from home. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches, soup, sometimes a piece of pie. He would tear up every time. "You don't know what this means to me," he would say. I also started buying his medications with my own money when Jennifer claimed they were back-ordered. Harold tried to refuse, but I insisted. "It's what anyone would do," I told him. But we both knew that wasn't true. No one else would do it. No one else even looked at Harold as a human being. One evening, Patricia came to Harold's room with a man in an expensive suit. They had papers for Harold to sign. "For your continued care," Patricia explained. "State funding isn't enough anymore. We need you to sign over any assets you might have." Harold looked at the papers, then at Patricia. "I don't have any assets," he said calmly. Patricia's face turned red with frustration. "Everyone has something," she snapped. "Even welfare cases like you must have some savings hidden away." That's when Harold did something unexpected. He laughed. Not a bitter laugh, but genuine amusement. "Mrs. Barnes," he said, "if I had money, do you think I'd be in this place?" Patricia stormed out, but the man in the suit stayed for a moment. He looked at Harold curiously, then left without a word. "But is Hulshokadichi Olanshe?" Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. The next week, Harold's health took a bad turn. He collapsed in the shower when no one was around to help. I found him 2 hours later, hypothermic and barely conscious. I called for help, but Jennifer took her time responding. "He's old," she said to Patricia later, not knowing I was listening. "Maybe this is nature's way of solving our Harold problem." Harold survived, but he was weaker. His hands shook more. He could barely walk, and his memory seemed to be slipping. At least, that's what everyone thought. Patricia and Jennifer became bolder in their cruelty. They would talk about Harold while he was in the room, as if he couldn't hear or understand. "Dead weight," Patricia called him. "Should have died months ago," Jennifer added. One day, Emily finally showed up, Harold's granddaughter, the successful real estate agent he was so proud of, but she didn't come to see Harold. She went straight to Patricia's office. I was cleaning nearby and overheard their conversation. Emily wanted to know about Harold's will, about his power of attorney, about his assets. "The old fool must have something hidden," Emily said. "Nobody works their whole life without saving something. Maybe he's got life insurance I don't know about." Patricia assured Emily they would work together to find out what Harold had. They even discussed having Harold declared mentally incompetent so Emily could take control of his affairs. "He's clearly showing signs of dementia," Patricia lied. "I could have our doctor write up an evaluation." I wanted to warn Harold, but when I went to his room, he was sitting in his chair, tears streaming down his face. He had heard everything. His own granddaughter, the only family he had left, was plotting against him. "She used to sit on my lap and call me Pop-Pop," Harold whispered. "I paid for her college, you know. Sold my car to make sure she could graduate debt-free. She doesn't even remember." That night, Harold asked me to sit with him. He couldn't sleep. "Maria," he said, "I need to tell you something, but you must promise to keep it secret until the right time." I promised. Then Harold told me the truth. He wasn't poor. He wasn't on welfare. Harold Mitchell was worth approximately $500 million. 40 years ago, after his wife and daughter died, Harold threw himself into his work. He built a technology company from nothing, pioneered several patents in early computer processing, and sold everything at the height of the dot-com boom. But the money meant nothing to him without his family. So he decided to live simply, anonymously, to see if he could find genuine human connection without the influence of wealth. "I've been testing them all," Harold said. "Every single person in this place. I wanted to see who would show kindness to someone who had nothing to offer in return. In 15 years, Maria, you're the only one who treated me like a human being." Just then, things were about to get even more interesting. Harold pulled out a business card from his drawer. "This is my real lawyer," he said, "not the actor Patricia brought in. That was a test too." The card read Richardson and Associates, Estate Planning, one of the most prestigious law firms in the country. The next morning, Harold's real lawyer arrived, Charles Richardson himself, senior partner. Patricia nearly fainted when she saw him walk past her office and straight to Harold's basement room. They spent 3 hours together. When Richardson left, he stopped at my cleaning cart. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, "Mr. Mitchell speaks very highly of you. We'll be in touch soon." Patricia was in panic mode. She recognized Richardson from the business news. Why would someone like that be visiting Harold? She and Jennifer suddenly became very attentive to Harold's needs. Fresh flowers appeared in his room. His medications were delivered on time. Hot meals were served with a smile. Harold watched it all with amusement. Emily started visiting every day. She would bring Harold his favorite candies, talk about old memories, even cry about how much she missed him. "I'm so sorry I haven't been around, Pop," she would say. "Work has been so busy, but you're my priority now." Harold would pat her hand and smile, but his eyes remained cold. Here's where everything shifted completely. Harold decided to play along with their sudden kindness. He told Patricia he might have some bonds he forgot about, maybe worth a few $1,000s. Patricia's eyes lit up. He told Emily about a possible life insurance policy. Emily immediately offered to help him find the paperwork. But Harold was documenting everything. Every conversation, every cruel comment from before, every fake kindness now. He had a small recorder I had given him, and he captured it all. Patricia talking about overcharging Medicare for Harold's care. Jennifer admitting to selling Harold's medications to other residents. Emily on the phone with her boyfriend, laughing about her pathetic grandfather and how she would put him in an even cheaper home once she got his money. The transformation in how they treated Harold was sickening to watch, if you knew the truth. Patricia moved Harold to a better room. Jennifer personally administered his medications with care. Emily brought in a physical therapist to help with Harold's mobility, all of them circling like vultures, waiting for Harold to reveal where his supposed few $1,000s were hidden. Then Harold collapsed again. This time, it was real. His heart was failing. The ambulance rushed him to the hospital, and the doctors said he had maybe 48 hours to live. Patricia, Jennifer, and Emily all rushed to his bedside, not out of concern, but out of fear that Harold would die before signing over his assets. They brought papers to the hospital, power of attorney forms, asset transfer documents, even a new will Emily had drafted that left everything to her. Harold was weak, barely conscious, but they pressed the pen into his hand. "Sign here, Mr. Mitchell," Patricia urged. "For your care." Harold's hand shook as he signed. Emily could barely contain her excitement. But then something incredible happened. Harold didn't die. Against all odds, he stabilized. The doctors were amazed. It was as if Harold had been waiting for something, holding on for one final moment. And that moment came the next morning, when Charles Richardson arrived at the hospital with a briefcase and several other lawyers. "Ladies," Richardson announced to Patricia, Jennifer, and Emily, "I'm here to inform you that Mr. Harold Mitchell has made some significant decisions regarding his estate." Emily practically jumped from her chair. "Yes, Pop promised to take care of me," she said quickly. Patricia added, "And the nursing home has been promised a generous donation for our years of care." Richardson smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Perhaps you should all sit down for this." He pulled out a thick folder. "Mr. Mitchell is worth approximately $500 million. The room went silent. Emily gasped. Patricia's face went white. Jennifer dropped her coffee cup. "Furthermore," Richardson continued, "Mr. Mitchell has been documenting his treatment at Golden Years Nursing Home for the past 2 years. Every instance of neglect, abuse, and attempted fraud has been recorded." He pulled out a recorder and pressed play. Patricia's voice filled the room. "That worthless old man should just die already and stop wasting our resources." Emily tried to speak, but Richardson held up his hand. "There's more." He played another recording. Emily's voice this time. "I can't wait until the old fool croaks. I've already put a deposit on a new Lamborghini." The blood drained from Emily's face. "Pop, I didn't mean, I was just joking." But Harold wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. "Maria," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Come here, dear." I approached his bed, my legs shaking. Harold took my hand. "Ladies," Harold said, addressing Patricia, Jennifer, and Emily, "let me tell you what's going to happen. Patricia, you're going to be reported to the State Board for elder abuse and Medicare fraud. Jennifer, your nursing license will be revoked for medication theft and neglect. The police are waiting outside to arrest you both." Patricia and Jennifer looked toward the door in panic. 2 police officers were indeed standing there. "As for you, Emily," Harold continued, his voice filled with disappointment, "you're my biggest regret. I gave you everything, and you became nothing but greed incarnate." Emily was crying now. Real tears this time. "Pop, please. I'm your granddaughter. Your only family." Harold shook his head. "No, Emily. Family doesn't plot against you. Family doesn't celebrate your anticipated death. Family loves you when you have nothing to give." Richardson opened another document. "Mr. Mitchell's entire estate, all $500 million, will be placed in a trust, the Harold and Margaret Mitchell Foundation for Elder Care. It will build and operate nursing homes where elderly residents are treated with dignity, regardless of their financial status." He paused. "The foundation will be managed by Miss Maria Rodriguez." I couldn't breathe. "What? No, I can't. I don't know how to." Harold squeezed my hand. "You know how to care, Maria. That's all that matters. Charles will help you with the rest." Emily exploded. "You can't do this. I'm your blood. She's nobody. She's just a janitor." Harold's eyes flashed with anger. The first time I'd ever seen him truly angry. "She's the only person in 2 years who saw me as a human being. She spent her own money to buy my medications. She brought me food when you all tried to starve me. She held my hand when I was dying alone in that basement. She's not nobody. She's everything you could have been if greed hadn't poisoned your soul." Patricia tried to run, but the police stopped her. Jennifer was already in handcuffs. Emily fell to her knees, begging, pleading, making promises. But Harold was done listening. He turned to me. "Maria, there's one more thing. I'm not actually dying. The doctors gave me medication to slow my heart rate, to make it seem like I was at death's door. I needed them to show their true colors one final time. The room erupted in chaos. Emily screaming about lawsuits, Patricia threatening witnesses, Jennifer crying about her children. But Harold remained calm. I wanted to believe, he said quietly, that somewhere in this world kindness still existed without conditions. You proved it does, Maria. In my darkest moments, when I had nothing to offer, you gave me everything: dignity, respect, and genuine care. The police escorted Patricia and Jennifer out. Emily was told to leave and never contact Harold again. Richardson handed me a card. We'll need to meet next week to discuss the foundation, he said. Mr. Mitchell has grand plans. The first Harold and Margaret Mitchell Care Center will break ground next year. Harold lived another 5 years. We moved him to a beautiful private facility where he was treated like the remarkable man he was. I visited him every day, not as his janitor, but as his friend. He taught me about business, about running a foundation, about seeing the good in people while protecting yourself from the bad. The Mitchell Foundation now operates 57 nursing homes across the country. Every resident, regardless of their financial status, receives the same excellent care. We've helped thousands of elderly people live their final years with dignity and respect. Emily tried to contest the will, but the recordings buried her case. Patricia went to prison for fraud. Jennifer lost her license and now works at a gas station. But here's the part that still gives me chills. On Harold's last day, 5 years after that hospital confrontation, he told me one final secret. Maria, he whispered, I have one more surprise. He handed me a sealed envelope. Open this after I'm gone. Harold passed away that night, peacefully, holding my hand. When I opened the envelope, I found a photograph, the same one he used to stare at every night, his wife and daughter. On the back he had written, Margaret always said angels come in unexpected forms. She was right. Thank you for being mine. Take care of our foundation. Love, Harold. There was also a personal check, $50 million made out to me personally, separate from the foundation. The memo line read, for the sandwiches, the medicine, but mostly for seeing me. I cried for hours. I tried to donate it to the foundation, but Richardson stopped me. Harold's instructions were clear, he said. He wanted you to have security, to never worry about money again, so you could focus on helping others without fear. I still work at the foundation every day. I still clean rooms sometimes, just to remember where I came from. And in every facility, in the best room with the best view, there's a portrait of Harold Mitchell. Below it, a plaque reads, Kindness is the only currency that matters. Emily reached out last year. She's broke now. Her real estate business collapsed during a market downturn. She asked for help, for forgiveness, for a second chance. I thought about what Harold would do. He believed in justice, but he also believed in redemption. I offered her a job at one of our facilities. As a janitor, she would start where I started, learn what I learned. She took it. Last week, I saw Emily helping an elderly man who had soiled himself. Instead of complaining or passing the job to someone else, she cleaned him gently, spoke to him kindly, preserved his dignity. Maybe Harold's final lesson wasn't just about justice. Maybe it was about transformation, about how the right circumstances can reveal who we really are or who we can become. The Harold and Margaret Mitchell Foundation continues to grow. We've exposed dozens of abusive facilities, reformed elder care laws in 17 states, and showed the world that profit and compassion can coexist. But none of it would have happened if Harold hadn't played his long game, if he hadn't endured 2 years of humiliation and abuse to prove a point. Some people say Harold was cruel, that he should have revealed his wealth sooner, stopped the abuse faster. But Harold knew something they didn't. He knew that true character only reveals itself when people think no one important is watching. He knew that the only way to build something better was to first expose how broken the system was. Every night before I leave the office, I look at Harold's portrait. Those pale blue eyes still hold secrets, still seem to be watching, still seem to be teaching. And I remember his words: "Money doesn't change people, Maria. It just reveals who they really were all along." The Mitchell Foundation has a motto now. Harold's words that we put on every building: "Dignity is not a luxury. Respect is not optional. Kindness is not weakness. And every soul has value, regardless of their bank account." Harold Mitchell died with $500 million, but pretended to have nothing. In doing so, he found the one thing money couldn't buy: a true friend, and in return, he gave me something priceless: the chance to ensure no elderly person would ever suffer the way he chose to suffer, to prove a point that needed proving. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can feel Harold watching, nodding approvingly as another care center opens. Another elderly person receives the respect they deserve. Another Harold Mitchell gets the care he pretended not to need, but absolutely deserved. The truth is, we all have a Harold Mitchell in our lives. Someone we overlook, someone we dismiss, someone we treat as less than human because we think they have nothing to offer. Harold's revenge wasn't just about punishing those who wronged him. It was about showing us all what we miss when we measure a person's worth by their bank account instead of their character. And that's the most shocking part of this story. Not that Harold was secretly rich, not that he fooled everyone, but that it took a fortune hidden in plain sight to make people realize that every elderly person in every nursing home deserves the same thing: to be treated like a human being. Harold Mitchell's greatest trick wasn't hiding his millions. It was revealing our poverty, the poverty of compassion in a system that sorts human beings by their ability to pay. And his greatest gift wasn't the foundation or the money. It was the reminder that sometimes the janitor cleaning your room might be the richest person you'll ever meet, just not in the way you'd expect. The sealed envelope Diana left with her lawyer was written just 10 days before her death. On it, in trembling handwriting, was a single note: "If something happens to me, know that it was not an accident." That August morning at Kensington Palace in London, everything seemed normal. Diana embraced her sons William and Harry, holding them as she always did. But there was something different in her eyes. Her close bodyguard Ken Wharf noticed the princess's hands were trembling that morning. Diana turned to him and whispered quietly. She was no longer safe. She could feel it. Inside the envelope she delivered to her lawyer Paul Burrell weren't just diary pages. Diana had included recordings of threatening phone calls she'd received in recent months, receipts for strange repairs made to her car's brake system, and most importantly, encrypted messages from a high-ranking member of the royal family. One of these messages stated clearly, if the divorce settlement is not accepted, the consequences will be severe. After her official divorce from Charles in 1996, Diana had become a completely different woman. She was no longer silent. She was speaking out. That famous line she delivered in her BBC interview had shaken the palace to its core. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. This reference to Camilla Parker Bowles had infuriated the Queen. But the real bombshell was Diana's threat to expose the royal family's dirty laundry. The princess knew Charles had relationships, not just with Camilla, but with other women too. More importantly, she had learned about the royal family's offshore accounts, their tax evasion methods, and their secret partnerships with arms-dealing companies. A former palace servant had shown Diana documents from the royal vault. Among these documents were Prince Philip's secret investments in Greece and oil deals in the Middle East. Diana wrote in her diary, "Philip hates me. I see the coldness in his eyes when he looks at my face. In the letter he sent me last week, he wrote that everything necessary will be done to protect the family's reputation." Was this a threat? I'm certain it was. In July 1997, there was a new man in Diana's life, Dodi Al Fayed. Her relationship with the Egyptian billionaire's son had driven the royal family to fury. The possibility of marriage to a Muslim, the chance that the mother of the future King of England might convert to Islam, was unacceptable to the palace. Diana's words to her close friend Lucia Fletcher de Lima were striking. Dodi's family's power protects me. Without them, I would have already had an accident. But Dodi's father, Mohammed Al Fayed, had his own plans. He wanted to use Diana to gain a place within the royal family, to be accepted by the British elite. Diana was aware of this, but didn't care. She noted in her diary, "Everyone is using me. At least Dodi gives me happiness. Charles used me for years. Now it's my turn." In mid-August, before going to Paris, Diana called her son William. The 15-year-old William immediately noticed the worry in his mother's voice. Diana told him, "I will always love you and Harry very much. No matter what happens, you must be strong. The royal family will try to change you, but don't lose yourself." 3 days before going to Paris, Diana's driver Steve Park had a strange accident. His brakes had failed, and he survived miraculously. Diana believed this accident was no coincidence. She noted in her diary, "What happened to Steve was a warning to me. I'm next." Former MI6 agent Richard Tomlinson, in testimony given years later, said he had attended a meeting months before Diana's death. At this meeting, the elimination of a problematic royal member was discussed. The plan was simple: an accident in a tunnel. The driver would appear drunk, paparazzi would be blamed, everything would look like a tragic accident. During Diana's final days at the Ritz Hotel, there were constantly mysterious men around her. The hotel's security cameras recorded 3 unidentified people entering Diana's room. These recordings disappeared after the crash. The Ritz's security manager, Henry Paul, would be Diana's driver that night. But Henry Paul was no ordinary security guard. According to documents leaked from French intelligence, Henry Paul worked for both MI6 and French Secret Service. £12,000 was deposited into his account on the day of the crash. Where did this money come from? High levels of alcohol and carbon monoxide were allegedly found in Paul's blood, but the doctor who performed the autopsy stated these results were impossible, because Paul appeared sober in footage before the crash. That night, August 30th, 1997, as Diana and Dodi left the Ritz Hotel, everything seemed planned. The normally used route was changed at the last minute. Diana's bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, had been instructed to be the only one wearing a seatbelt. He was the sole survivor of the crash and lost his memory, or pretended to lose it. As they entered the Alma Tunnel, Diana noticed a white Fiat Uno behind them. This car was following them. Witnesses said they saw a motorcycle behind the Mercedes, and its rider shining a bright light toward the Mercedes. Henry Paul suddenly lost control. The car crashed into the tunnel's 13th pillar at 120 kilometers per hour. 13 was the royal family's unlucky number. What happened after the crash was even more suspicious. Diana was initially alive. The ambulance took 1 hour and 43 minutes to cover a distance that should normally take 5 minutes. During this time, the ambulance stopped twice. The reason: medical intervention was cited. But what intervention was never explained. When Diana arrived at the hospital, doctors said she could be saved. But suddenly, her condition worsened. Her death was announced at 4 a.m. The procedures performed on Diana's body also raised suspicions. Her organs, which should have been preserved according to royal protocol, were accidentally cremated. Evidence that would show whether she was pregnant was destroyed. Dodi's father, Mohammed Al Fayed, claimed Diana was pregnant with Dodi's child, and this was unacceptable to the royal family. After the crash, Diana's personal belongings at Kensington Palace were cleared out. Her diaries, letters, voice recordings disappeared. Diana's former butler, Paul Burrell, had managed to hide some documents, but the Queen summoned him and said, "Be careful, Paul. There are powers in this country that even we cannot control." Was this a threat or a warning? Diana's sister, Lady Sarah McCorquodale, made a shocking statement after the funeral. "Diana told me weeks before her death that someone was planning to kill her. I hadn't believed her." Charles Spencer, Diana's brother, gave the royal family a clear message in his funeral speech. "You hunted Diana. Now you'll try to hunt her children, but I won't allow it." Years later, Diana's son Prince Harry made a shocking confession. He said he was disturbed by the royal family's lack of response after his mother's death, that they didn't even shed tears at Diana's funeral. Harry implied he believed his mother's death was not an accident. His decision to leave the royal family in 2019 was to avoid experiencing what his mother went through. In one of the last letters Diana wrote before her death were these lines: "Charles has a plan to eliminate me. They're planning a car accident, brake failure, or something else. This way he can marry Camilla. When I'm dead, everything will be as they want." This letter emerged after Diana's death, but the British press refrained from publishing it. Only one small newspaper gathered the courage to publish it and came under enormous pressure. The newspaper owner said he received threatening phone calls, and advertisers suddenly withdrew. The former head of French intelligence, in an interview given years later, said all evidence was systematically destroyed after Diana's crash. The tunnel cameras were said to be broken, but there were witnesses that they were working that day. The white Fiat Uno was never found. Its owner, a paparazzi named James Anderson, was found dead in a burned car in 2000. It was called suicide, but he had a bullet wound in his head. On the last page of Diana's diary were these lines: "I know what they'll write in history. Unhappy princess, paranoid woman, unstable mother. But the truth is different. I just wanted to love and be loved. This simple desire threatened the world's most powerful monarchy. The price will be heavy, I know, but my children will learn the truth one day." Before we continue with more shocking revelations about that fateful night, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more untold stories that were never meant to see the light of day. Now, let's return to what really happened in those final hours. The truth about Diana's final days goes even deeper than anyone imagined. Former MI5 officer David Shaler later revealed that Diana had been under surveillance for years. Every phone call monitored, every meeting recorded, every relationship scrutinized. The intelligence services had compiled a file on her that was thicker than those of most foreign agents. But why? What made a princess such a threat to national security? The answer lay in Diana's growing influence and her willingness to use it. After her divorce, she hadn't retreated into silence as expected. Instead, she had become more powerful, more vocal, more dangerous to the establishment. Her landmine campaign had embarrassed the government, forcing them to change policy. Her AIDS work had challenged social prejudices the conservative establishment preferred to maintain. But most threatening of all was her plan to expose the arms deals. Diana had discovered through her charity work that British-made weapons were being sold to regimes that used them against civilians. She had photographs, documents, proof that implicated several members of parliament, and even suggested knowledge at the highest levels of the royal family. She planned to hold a press conference in September 1997, just weeks after her death, where she would reveal everything. That press conference never happened. Mohammed Al-Fayed's former security chief revealed years later that Dodi had purchased an engagement ring the day before the crash. The receipt from Repassi Jewelers in Monaco showed a purchase of £11,600 for a Tell Me Yes ring. But this wasn't just any engagement. If Diana married Dodi, she would become stepmother to the future King of England, while being married to a Muslim. The constitutional crisis this would create was unprecedented. The royal family's reaction to the potential engagement was swift and severe. Prince Philip allegedly sent Diana a letter that has never been made public. Those who claim to have seen it describe it as threatening and unambiguous. The letter supposedly ended with the line, "You will not humiliate the crown any further." Diana showed this letter to her friend Simone Simmons, who later testified that Diana was genuinely frightened by its tone. On the morning of August 30th, just hours before the crash, Diana made several phone calls. One was to her friend Rosa Monckton, where she said something cryptic, "They're closing in. I can feel it." Another was to her spiritual advisor, where she asked about protection prayers. Her final call was to her sons, where she told them she loved them and would see them soon. She never did. The Ritz Hotel that night was a maze of deception. Henri Paul, who wasn't even supposed to be working, was called in specifically to drive Diana. Security cameras showed him drinking what appeared to be pineapple juice at the bar, but toxicology reports claimed he was heavily intoxicated. How could a man supposedly 3 times over the legal limit walk steadily, talk coherently, and be entrusted with the princess's safety? Even more mysterious was the route taken that night. The normal path from the Ritz to Dodi's apartment was straightforward, well lit, and took about 8 minutes. Instead, Henri Paul took a route that was longer, darker, and went through the Alma Tunnel. This route had never been used before. Who gave the order to change it? The decision was made just minutes before they left, suggesting someone wanted them in that specific location. Inside the tunnel, witnesses reported seeing a bright flash just before the Mercedes lost control. Military experts later testified that this was consistent with a strobe light weapon designed to temporarily blind drivers. Such devices were known to be used by intelligence services. James and Danson, the paparazzi who owned the white Fiat Uno seen at the crash site, was later found to have connections to French intelligence. His death in 2000, officially ruled a suicide, despite the physical impossibility of him shooting himself in the head twice, ensured he would never testify. The ambulance that carried Diana took an inexplicable route to the hospital. Instead of going to the nearest hospital, just 3 minutes away, it went to Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, passing 4 other hospitals along the way. During this journey, the ambulance stopped twice, allegedly to stabilize Diana. But Dr. Frédéric Mallier, the first doctor on scene, later said Diana's injuries, while serious, were survivable with prompt treatment. The delay cost her life. At the hospital, something even stranger occurred. Diana was initially conscious and speaking. Nurse Jean Marie told her family years later that Diana had grabbed her hand and said, "They've done it. Tell my boys I love them." These words were never included in any official report. The nurse was transferred to another hospital within a week and signed a confidentiality agreement that would ruin her financially if broken. The cleanup operation began immediately. Within hours of Diana's death, her apartment at Kensington Palace was stripped. Her personal effects, including letters, recordings, and photographs, were removed by men in unmarked vans. Her personal computer's hard drive was wiped clean. Even her mobile phone records from the past year mysteriously disappeared from the phone company's database. Paul Burrell, Diana's butler, managed to hide some items before the cleanup crew arrived. He later revealed that among these items was a tape recording where Diana detailed her fears. On this tape, Diana allegedly named the person she believed would orchestrate her death. Burrell has never revealed the name, claiming he still fears for his life. When he was later charged with stealing Diana's possessions, the Queen herself intervened to stop the trial, citing a private meeting where Burrell had informed her of certain items in his possession. What was so important that the Queen would personally intervene? The official investigation, Operation Paget, took 3 years and cost £12.5 million. It concluded the crash was an accident caused by Henry Paul's drunk driving and the pursuing paparazzi. But Lord Stevens, who led the investigation, later admitted privately that there were questions that couldn't be answered and pressures from above to reach certain conclusions. Several witnesses to the crash died under mysterious circumstances. In the following years, journalist John Paul Crescent, who was investigating the crash, died in a suspicious house fire where the smoke detectors had been disabled. Francois Levistre, who testified about seeing a bright flash, died in a car accident remarkably similar to Diana's. Mark Bolan, who claimed to have video footage of the crash, disappeared entirely. His family received a single postcard from Argentina saying he was starting a new life. They never heard from him again. Even Diana's sons were not immune to the cover-up. Prince William was allegedly shown evidence of his mother's supposed paranoia and mental instability to convince him the crash was accidental. Harry, younger and more rebellious, was sent to Africa immediately after the funeral and kept away from the media for months. When he returned, he was a changed person, refusing to discuss his mother's death for years. The French investigation was equally compromised. Judge Hervé Stephan, initially in charge, was removed from the case after he began questioning the official narrative. His replacement, Judge Marie-Christine Devedal, quickly concluded it was an accident. Years later, Stephan revealed he had been threatened with career consequences if he continued investigating certain leads. Perhaps most damning was the testimony of former MI6 officer Richard Tomlinson. He revealed that MI6 had a plan, codenamed Bologna, specifically designed for assassinations, made to look like car accidents. The plan involved using a strobe light to blind the driver, a following car to ensure the crash, and a cleanup team to manage the aftermath. Every element of this plan matched what happened in the Alma Tunnel. Diana's premonitions about her death were not mere paranoia. She had told multiple friends about specific threats she'd received. Her hairdresser, Nathalie Simons, testified that Diana had said, "One day I'll go up in a helicopter, and it'll just blow up, or my car brakes will fail." Her friend Lucia Fleca de Lima confirmed Diana had spoken about fears of a staged car accident. Even her acupuncturist, Donna Toffolo, said Diana had told him about her fears just days before her death. The royal family's behavior after Diana's death raised even more questions. The Queen initially refused to lower the flag at Buckingham Palace, breaking protocol for a former royal who was the mother of a future king. She remained at Balmoral, showing no public emotion, until public outcry forced her to return to London. Her televised address seemed scripted and cold, referring to Diana as an exceptional and gifted human being rather than family. Prince Charles's reaction was equally telling. Witnesses at the hospital reported he seemed more concerned about retrieving Diana's jewelry than grieving her loss. He immediately took possession of all her personal effects, including items that legally belonged to her sons. When asked years later about Diana's death, he simply said, "We must all move forward," never once suggesting any investigation into the circumstances. The establishment's treatment of Mohammed El-Fayed, who lost his son in the same crash, was revealing. When he called for a proper investigation, he was dismissed as a grieving father, consumed by conspiracy theories. His businesses were suddenly subject to intense scrutiny. His reputation was systematically destroyed in the press, and he was effectively exiled from British high society. The message was clear: don't ask questions. Diana's legacy of charity work was quickly corporatized and controlled. The Diana Memorial Fund was established, but Diana's sister Sarah later revealed that the royal family had insisted on veto power over all decisions. Charities Diana had supported that were controversial, particularly those dealing with landmines and AIDS, found their royal patronage quietly withdrawn. Even the memorial to Diana was controversial. The initial design was rejected by the royal family as too prominent. The final memorial, a fountain in Hyde Park, was plagued with problems and had to be closed multiple times. Many saw this as deliberate, a way to diminish Diana's memory and impact. Her brother Charles Spencer fought for years to have a proper memorial established, facing resistance at every turn. The impact on Diana's sons was profound. William, groomed to be king, publicly accepted the official narrative, but privately struggled. Friends reported he would sometimes stare at photos of his mother and ask, "What really happened?" Harry's pain was more visible. His years of rebellion, his military service, his eventual decision to leave the royal family, all stemmed from that night in Paris. In his memoir, he wrote obliquely about questions that can never be asked and truths that can never be spoken. In 2013, Scotland Yard announced they were examining new information about Diana's death, including allegations by a former SAS soldier that the elite regiment was involved. The soldier's former wife had sent a letter claiming he had boasted that the SAS had arranged Diana's death. The investigation was quickly closed with no explanation, and the soldier was discredited as psychologically unstable. The media's role in the cover-up cannot be ignored. Editors who pursued the story too aggressively found themselves replaced. Journalists who asked difficult questions were denied access to royal events. Even decades later, British media outlets are reluctant to seriously investigate Diana's death, knowing the consequences. The few who do are relegated to tabloid status, their credibility systematically undermined. International journalists fared no better. French journalist Pierre Ottavioli, who had investigated the role of French intelligence, died in a motorcycle accident. Italian photographer Mario Brenna, who claimed to have photos from inside the tunnel, had his home burglarized and all his equipment stolen. American journalist George Walden, preparing a book on Diana's death, suffered a near-fatal heart attack at age 45. Despite having no history of heart problems, he abandoned the project. The technology cover-up was equally thorough. The Alma Tunnel had been equipped with CCTV cameras, but they were all allegedly malfunctioning that night. Traffic cameras on the route were similarly out of order. Even private security cameras from nearby buildings somehow failed to capture any useful footage. In an age where everything was recorded, the most famous woman in the world died in a complete surveillance blind spot. Diana's prediction about her own death was chillingly accurate. In her letter to Paul Burrell, she had written about a car accident, specifically mentioning brake failure. The Mercedes's brake system was never properly examined, as the car was accidentally crushed before independent investigators could inspect it. The French authorities claimed this was standard procedure, but experts disagreed, calling it unprecedented for such a high-profile case. The role of the paparazzi, initially blamed for the crash, was another smokescreen. Most of the photographers were far behind the Mercedes when it crashed. The one photographer who was close, James Antonson, was never officially questioned before his suspicious death. His white Fiat Uno, seen by multiple witnesses at the crash scene, was later found burned out, but French police claimed it couldn't have been involved, despite paint transfers that matched the Mercedes. Even the choice of Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital was suspicious. This hospital had a special unit that dealt with government officials and had protocols for handling sensitive cases. Bruno Rio, who led Diana's treatment, was later promoted to head of emergency services for all Paris hospitals. Nurses who were on duty that night were transferred or retired early. The hospital's records from that night remain sealed, classified under national security provisions. The embalming of Diana's body, performed illegally in France, without proper authorization, destroyed any chance of determining if she was pregnant. This procedure was ordered by British officials before French authorities had completed their investigation. The French government protested privately, but never pursued the matter publicly. The embalmer, Jean Monceau, later died in a car accident, taking his secrets with him. British intelligence's involvement went beyond surveillance. Former NSA contractor Edward Snowden revealed in leaked documents that GCHQ had been monitoring Diana's communications for years under a program code named Royal Watch. Every phone call, every email, every fax was intercepted and analyzed. The official reason was national security, but the real purpose seemed to be control. Diana had been planning more than just exposing arms deals. She had been working on a documentary about the royal family's hidden wealth, including offshore accounts, art collections kept from public view, and properties owned through shell companies. She had enlisted the help of investigative journalist Bernhard Levin, who died of a sudden stroke 2 weeks after Diana's death, despite being in perfect health. The cleanup of Diana's Kensington Palace apartment revealed the extent of the surveillance. Hidden microphones were found in the walls, telephone taps in the junction boxes, and even a tracking device in her car. When confronted, intelligence services claimed these were for her protection, but Diana had never been informed or consented to such intrusive surveillance. Mohammed Al-Fayed's own investigation uncovered disturbing facts. He hired former FBI agents who discovered that several intelligence operatives had been stationed around the Ritz Hotel that night. Phone records showed calls between these operatives and handlers in London, just minutes before Diana left the hotel. One operative, who later agreed to speak anonymously, said he was told to observe and report, but was suddenly recalled just before the crash. The financial aspects were equally suspicious. Henry Paul, supposedly a low-paid security guard, had over 1.2 million francs in 15 different bank accounts. Large deposits were made in the days leading up to the crash, sourced from untraceable accounts. His family was paid a substantial sum after his death, despite French law typically not compensating families of drunk drivers who cause fatal accidents. Even Diana's final words remain disputed. The official report claims she was unconscious from impact, but first responders reported differently. Firefighter Xavier Gourmelin said Diana was conscious, speaking, and seemed likely to survive. His testimony was later changed in official records, and he was instructed not to speak to media. When he finally did years later, he faced disciplinary action. The pathology reports raised more questions. Dr. Robert Chapman, reviewing the autopsy findings, noted injuries inconsistent with a simple car crash. There were marks on Diana's body, suggesting she had been restrained or held down. These observations were excluded from the official report as speculative and unhelpful to the investigation. Diana's spiritual advisor, Simone Simmons, revealed that Diana had recorded videos detailing her fears and naming those she believed wanted her dead. These tapes were kept in a safety deposit box at a London bank. After Diana's death, the box was opened by royal officials and the contents removed. Simmons was visited by intelligence officers who suggested she forget about the tapes. The role of Trevor Rees-Jones, the bodyguard who survived, remains controversial. His memory loss was selective, remembering some details clearly while having complete amnesia about crucial moments. His medical records showed injuries consistent with someone who had braced for impact, suggesting he knew the crash was coming. He was quickly relocated to a secure facility and later disappeared from public view entirely. French emergency services protocols were mysteriously not followed that night. Standard procedure for a VIP injury was helicopter evacuation to a specialized trauma center. Instead, Diana was taken by ambulance on a bizarre route that took nearly 2 hours. Patrick Goldstein, an emergency medicine expert, called the delay medically inexcusable and guaranteed to be fatal. The investigation files contain numerous redacted sections, classified for national security reasons. What national security issue could be involved in a simple drunk driving accident? French investigators who tried to access these sections were told they required clearance levels above even senior police officials. One investigator resigned in frustration, saying the investigation was theater, not justice. Diana's friend Rosa Monckton revealed that Diana had been compiling evidence of illegal arms deals involving British companies and Middle Eastern regimes. This dossier included photographs, documents, and recordings that would have been devastating to several prominent figures. After Diana's death, her lawyer's office was burglarized, and only these files were taken. Nothing else was disturbed. The behavior of the royal family in the years following Diana's death has only reinforced suspicions. They have blocked every attempt at a new investigation, refused to answer questions, and used their influence to silence those who might speak out. Even Diana's sons are bound by constitutional obligations that prevent them from demanding answers about their mother's death. Prince Harry's recent revelations have hinted at darker truths. He spoke of genetic pain and cycles of trauma in the royal family. His decision to leave wasn't just about media pressure, but about knowing things that would make your blood run cold. When asked directly about his mother's death, he said, "I know more than I'm allowed to say." The transformation of William is equally telling. Once angry and questioning, he has become the perfect royal, never mentioning his mother's death, except in approved speeches. Friends say he was shown evidence that convinced him to stop asking questions. What could be so powerful that it would silence a son seeking truth about his mother's death? Even today, those who investigate Diana's death face consequences. Journalists find their careers stalled, investigators face legal challenges, and witnesses remain frightened. The message is clear: this case is closed, and those who try to open it do so at their own peril. The establishment's greatest victory wasn't killing Diana. It was killing the truth about her death. In her final diary entry, Diana wrote something prophetic. "They think they can silence me, but my death will speak louder than my life ever could." The truth has a way of surfacing, even from the deepest graves. My sons will know. The world will know. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday, everything hidden will be revealed. That day has not yet come. The official narrative remains unchanged. The files remain sealed, and those who knew the truth are dead or silenced. But Diana was right about one thing: the truth has a way of surfacing. Every year, more evidence emerges, more witnesses find courage, and the official story becomes harder to maintain. Perhaps the most chilling aspect is not what happened that night in Paris, but what it reveals about power, control, and the lengths to which institutions will go to protect themselves. Diana's death wasn't just the elimination of an inconvenient princess. It was a message to anyone who might challenge the established order. The royal family continues to this day, their secrets protected, their power intact, but Diana's ghost haunts them. Every charity event, every public appearance, every carefully staged photo opportunity is overshadowed by the memory of the woman they couldn't control and the questions they won't answer. As one former intelligence officer put it, Diana Spencer died because she refused to play by their rules. She thought being the mother of the future king would protect her. She was wrong. In their world, no one is indispensable, no one is protected, and no one is allowed to expose the truth. The final truth about Diana's death may never be officially acknowledged. Too many powerful people have too much to lose. But for those who look closely, who question the inconsistencies, who refuse to accept the official narrative, the truth is clear. Diana didn't die in a simple car accident. She was murdered by those who saw her as a threat to their power, their secrets, and their control. Her prediction came true in the most tragic way possible. They silenced her voice, but not her message. Every year, more people question what really happened that night in Paris. Every year, the official story becomes less believable. And every year, Diana's truth grows stronger, waiting for the day when justice might finally prevail. In death, Diana became more powerful than she ever was in life. She became a symbol of truth, suppressed, justice denied, and the terrible price of challenging those who believe they are above the law. Her legacy is not just in the charities she supported or the causes she championed, but in the questions her death raised about power, privilege, and the dark heart of the establishment. The princess, who just wanted to love and be loved, became the woman who exposed the ugliest truths about those who rule. And perhaps that's why she had to die. Not because she was divorced, not because she was dating a Muslim, but because she knew too much and wasn't afraid to tell the world. Diana's diary, hidden away in secret vaults, classified beyond top secret, remains the smoking gun that could bring down the house of cards. Those pages contain names, dates, and crimes that would shock even the most cynical observers. One day, those pages will see daylight. One day, Diana's truth will be told in full. Until then, we're left with fragments, whispers, and the undeniable fact that the most photographed woman in the world died in the only place in Paris where no cameras were working, in a car that was destroyed before it could be examined, with a driver whose blood samples were switched, heading to a hospital that was mysteriously far away, after making enemies of the most powerful people in Britain. If you believe that's all just coincidence, then perhaps you believe in fairy tales. But for those who see the pattern, who connect the dots, who refuse to be silenced, Diana's death is not a tragedy, but an assassination, not an accident, but a murder, not a closed case, but an open wound on the conscience of a nation. The princess is dead. Long live the truth.